in the scorched belly of a forgotten desert planet named Vorthax, where twin suns blazed like angry eyes in a sky choked with rust-colored dust, there stood a crumbling marketplace built from bones and black stone. The air shimmered with heat, thick as syrup, and the wind carried whispers of ancient sorrows through the cracked archways and sagging stalls. This was no ordinary bazaar. It was the slave pits of Zarnac, a place where hope went to die and lives were traded like dried fruit or faulty circuits. Creatures from 100 worlds shuffled behind iron bars, their eyes hollow, their spirits worn thin by chains and cruelty. Some had too many limbs, others too few. Some breathed fire, others wept acid. But among them all, two stood out, not for strength, not for rarity, but for silence. They were twin sisters, both tall and slender as desert reeds, with skin the color of moss after rain, deep, shimmering green, and hair like spun moonlight, long and white, cascading down their backs like frozen waterfalls. Their eyes were wide and silver, reflecting light even in the dimness, and they moved in perfect sync, as if sharing one soul between two bodies. They wore tattered gray robes that fluttered in the hot breeze, and around their wrists were bands of dull metal that pulsed faintly, suppressing something deep inside them. No one knew what they were capable of. No one dared ask. For weeks they had been left on display, ignored, passed over. Buyers came and went, poking, prodding, haggling over horned beasts and telepathic lizards. But none gave the green-skinned twins a second glance. "Too quiet," one merchant muttered. "Bad omen," said another. And so they remained, forgotten, until the day the auctioneer grew tired of them. "They are worthless. They are free. Take them," he bellowed, sweat dripping from his bulbous chin as he waved a three-fingered hand toward the sisters. His voice echoed across the pit like a cracked gong. "No reserve, no charge. Just get them off my lot before they rot the sand." A ripple of laughter ran through the small crowd. Mostly scavengers, broken traders, and a few desperate souls looking for cheap labor. But no one stepped forward. Not at first. Then, from the edge of the dusty square, a man emerged. He wasn't tall nor imposing. His clothes were patched and sun-bleached, his boots held together with wire and prayer. His name was Tarek, a wanderer who had come to Zarnac not for slaves, but for parts, old ship components, maybe a working power cell, anything to keep his battered vessel, the dust mite, from collapsing into scrap. He hadn't planned on buying anyone. He barely had enough credits to afford a meal, let alone a pair of mysterious aliens. But something about the way the sisters stood, so still, so calm amidst the chaos, caught his eye. They didn't flinch when the auctioneer yelled. They didn't beg. They simply looked at him, not with fear, but with something else, curiosity? Judgment? He couldn't tell. And yet, without thinking, Tarek raised his hand. "I'll take them," he said, his voice dry from the wind and disbelief. The auctioneer blinked. You serious? They're free. Just walk them out." Tarek hesitated. "I'll take them," he repeated. "Properly." A murmur rose. This was unusual. No one ever claimed free stock with dignity. Most just dragged their prizes away like stolen meat. But Tarek walked down into the pit, paid a single copper token, more symbolic than required, and signed a faded scroll with a trembling finger. The guards removed the suppression bands with a hiss, and the twins stepped forward, barefoot on the burning sand. One of them tilted her head slightly, studying Tarek like a puzzle she hadn't seen before. He swallowed hard. What had he done? The journey back to his ship was silent. The twins followed a few paces behind, never speaking, never stumbling, even as the dunes shifted beneath their feet. Tarek kept glancing back, expecting them to vanish or attack or burst into song. But they did nothing. When they reached the dust mite, a crooked patchwork vessel half buried in the red sands, he opened the hatch and gestured awkwardly. Home, I guess." They entered without hesitation, moving like shadows through the dim corridors. He showed them the sleeping quarters, 2 narrow bunks stacked like shelves, and left them there, unsure what else to do. That night, as the twin suns set and the stars blinked awake in the violet sky, Tarek sat in the cockpit sipping lukewarm synth tea and wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He had no use for slaves. He hated the system. He'd only taken them because no one else would. Because seeing them treated like trash made his stomach twist. But now he had 2 silent green women in his ship, and no idea what to do with them. Then a sound. Not words. Not footsteps. Music. Soft at first, like wind through glass chimes. It came from the sleeping quarters. Tarek crept down the hall and peered inside. The twins were sitting cross-legged on the floor, facing each other, hands nearly touching. Their white hair floated as if underwater, though there was no breeze. Between their palms hovered a tiny sphere of glowing green light, pulsing like a heartbeat. And the music, melodic, haunting, full of sorrow and wonder, was coming from them. Not from instruments, from their very skin, their breath, their joined gaze. It filled the ship, vibrating in the walls, making the old lights flicker in rhythm. Tarek stood frozen. He'd heard legends, whispers of the Sirin, an ancient race from the Veil Nebula, said to sing planets into bloom or shatter mountains with a whisper. They were supposed to be extinct, or mythical, and yet here they were, humming in his junk-filled spaceship like it was a temple. The next morning, he found them in the kitchen area, examining a dented pot. One tapped it with a finger. It rang once, clear and bright. The other smiled, just slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting like a sunrise. It was the first time he'd seen either of them express anything resembling emotion. "You, like that?" Tarek asked, scratching his stubbled chin. They didn't answer. Instead, the taller one, Tarek had started calling her Lyra in his head, though he didn't know why, picked up a spoon and tapped the pot again. Then she hummed a note. The pot responded, vibrating in harmony. The other sister, Mira, he decided, joined in with a higher tone. The vibrations grew, the metal shimmering, and suddenly, the dent popped back into place as if it had never been damaged. Tarek dropped his tea. What in the 9 galaxies was that? They looked at him unfazed, as if fixing pots with sound was the most normal thing in the universe. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen aboard the Dust Mite. The failing oxygen recycler, which Tarek had given up on months ago, started working again, better than new. The food synthesizer, which usually spat out gray mush, began producing warm bread, ripe fruit, even steaming bowls of soup that tasted exactly like his mother's. Tarek checked the systems. Nothing had changed. No repairs, no upgrades, and yet, everything worked. One evening, he caught them standing outside the ship, barefoot in the sand, arms outstretched toward the dying suns. They sang, not loud, but deep, a low resonance that made the ground tremble. Tiny green shoots sprouted from the barren soil around them, unfurling into delicate flowers with petals like stained glass. Tarek watched, jaw slack, as life bloomed in a place that hadn't seen green in centuries. "You can grow things?" he whispered. They turned. Lyra nodded once. "You're not slaves, are you?" he said, more to himself than them. "You're something else." That night, he dug through his old data logs, searching for any mention of green-skinned, white-haired beings with sonic abilities. Most records were fragmented, corrupted by time or war. But he found a fragment, a myth, really, from a long-dead explorer. The Sirin of Xylos Prime could awaken dead worlds with song, captured by the Dominion during the Purge Wars. Presumed eradicated. Tarek stared at the screen. Eradicated, right? Like every other oppressed people in the galaxy, someone had decided they were dangerous simply because they were different, because they could do what others couldn't. He thought of the suppression bands, how they'd hissed when removed. They weren't just restraints, they were silencers, designed to mute their voices, their power, their very essence. A wave of shame washed over him. He'd taken them from a slave market, yes, but he'd still taken them. Brought them to his ship like cargo. Fed them scraps. Expected nothing. And yet, they had already given him more than he deserved. The next morning, he cleared the table, the same one where he usually ate greasy protein bricks, and placed 2 cups of real tea, brewed from leaves he'd been saving for a special occasion. When the twins entered, he stood awkwardly. I want to say thank you, for the ship, for the food, for everything. I didn't know who you were. I still don't, really. But I know you're not property. You're guests. If you want to stay, or leave. Either way, it's your choice. They exchanged a glance. Then Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on the table. She closed her eyes. A soft hum began, low and warm. The wood beneath her palm darkened, smoothed, and began to grow. In seconds, the cheap metal table transformed into a living thing. Twisting roots forming legs, a smooth top blooming from sap, leaves sprouting at the edges. It was a tree table, alive and breathing, its branches gently swaying in the recycled air. Tarek laughed. A real laugh, loud and surprised. Okay, you win. That's amazing. From then on, things changed. Tarek stopped thinking of them as passengers. They became part of the ship, part of the journey. Mira took to repairing systems with sound, harmonizing with broken circuits until sparks ceased and wires glowed gold. Lyra tended to the tiny hydroponic garden, singing nutrients into the soil, coaxing tomatoes the size of fists and strawberries that tasted like starlight. Even the ship seemed to respond. Its groans softened, its engines purred, and for the first time in years, the dust mite felt alive. But peace never lasts long in the outer rim. One day, while refueling at a floating depot called Orbital 7, a grimy space station shaped like a melted gear, they were approached by a woman in a sharp black uniform adorned with silver insignias. Her eyes were cold, her smile sharper. "Tarek Vaughn," she said, reading from a datapad. "Registered owner of vessel Dust Mite. You're in possession of 2 undocumented alien entities matching the description of Class A Xenos. Siren lineage. By Dominion Code 12.7, such specimens are considered restricted assets due to historical biohazard potential. I'm authorized to reclaim them for study." Tarek's blood turned to ice. "They're not specimens. They're people. And they're not going anywhere." The woman, Agent Cross, tilted her head. "You have no legal claim. They were acquired in a sanctioned slave market. Ownership transfers with documentation. I have orders. Resistance will be met with force." Behind him, Lyra and Mira stepped forward, side by side. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The air around them thickened. A low vibration began, so subtle at first that only the loose bolts in the ceiling rattled. Agent Cross frowned. "What is that noise?" "It's not a noise," Tarek said, stepping beside the twins. "It's a warning." Cross signaled her 2 armored enforcers. They advanced, stun prods crackling. But before they could reach the group, Lyra opened her mouth. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She sang. A single, pure note erupted from her lips, so powerful it bent the light. The sound wave hit the enforcers like a wall. Their armor crumpled inward. They flew backward, slamming into the station wall and sliding down, unconscious. The windows shattered. Lights exploded. Alarms wailed, but were instantly drowned out by the continuing resonance. Agent Cross staggered, clutching her ears, blood trickling from her nose. "Impossible. The suppression bands. They're gone," Tarek said, shouting over the harmonic storm. "And you should have stayed gone." Mira joined her sister, their voices weaving together into a chord so beautiful and terrible it made Tarek's heart ache. The deck plates vibrated. The station groaned. Metal twisted. And then, as suddenly as it began, the song stopped. Silence. Agent Cross lay on the ground, dazed. Her weapon was a twisted lump of slag. The entire docking bay was in ruins. Wires dangling, panels ripped from walls, gravity flickering. People stared in awe and terror. Tarek looked at the twins. They were calm, unharmed, not even out of breath. "We need to leave," he said. They nodded. Back on the Dust Mite, as the engines roared to life and the station shrunk behind them, Tarek leaned against the console, heart pounding. "Well, that got messy." Lyra handed him a cup of tea, freshly grown, steaming, with a leaf still floating on top. He chuckled. "Thanks. I think we're officially wanted now." They didn't seem to mind. Days turned into weeks. Word spread through smuggler networks, pirate channels, refugee comms, of a small ship with 2 green women who could heal worlds with a song. Some called them angels, others weapons. Bounty hunters began to appear, shadowy figures in cloaked ships, scanning the void for the telltale signature of the Dust Mite. But every time one got close, the twins would stand at the viewports, raise their hands and sing. Sonic pulses would ripple through space, disabling engines, scrambling sensors, sometimes sending entire vessels spinning into safe retreat. They never killed, never harmed beyond necessity. But they made it clear, they would not be taken. Tarek, once a nobody drifting through the galaxy, now found himself at the center of something much bigger. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a warrior. He was just a man with a broken ship and 2 extraordinary beings who had chosen to stay with him. Why? He still didn't fully understand. Maybe because he had shown them kindness when no one else would. Maybe because, in their silence, they saw something in him worth protecting. One night, as they drifted through the rings of Saloon, a field of glowing crystal asteroids that chimed softly in the solar wind, the twins led Tarek outside in EVA suits. They tethered themselves to the hull and, together, began to sing. Not a weaponized frequency, not a repair tune, a lullaby, The crystals resonated, lighting up in waves of blue and green, pulsing like a heartbeat. The entire ring system began to glow, a celestial choir echoing their voices across light years. Tarek floated there, tears freezing on his cheeks inside his helmet, listening to the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. It wasn't just music. It was memory. It was grief. It was hope. Later, back aboard, he found a drawing on the mess table, made from woven fiber and colored dust. It showed 3 figures standing together under a tree on a green world, stars above. He recognized himself, clumsy and grinning, and the twins, radiant, their hands linked with his. "You drew this?" he asked. Mira nodded. Lyra pointed to the image, then to him, then to the stars. He understood. "We're not just running, are we?" he said softly. "We're looking for something. Place. A home." They smiled, both of them fully, brightly, for the first time. And in that moment, Tarek realized they weren't following him. They were leading. The stars became their map, not of coordinates or plotted courses, but of feelings, of resonance. Tarek had once navigated by fuel levels and gravity wells, but now the dust might drifted on something deeper. The silent understanding between 3 souls who had found each other in the wreckage of a cruel universe. The twins no longer needed words to guide the ship. They felt the pull of places that hummed with forgotten life, worlds where silence had grown too heavy, where the wind had forgotten how to sing. And Tarek followed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because every sunrise over a new planet, every bloom coaxed from dead soil, brought him closer to a truth he hadn't known he was searching for. Their bond grew quietly, like roots beneath stone. It wasn't sudden nor dramatic in the way stories told it. There were no grand declarations under alien moons, no desperate kisses in the shadow of exploding warships. Instead, it was in the small things. The way Lyra would place a hand on his shoulder when nightmares clawed at his sleep, her touch sending a soothing vibration through his bones until the darkness receded. Or how Mira began leaving little gifts. Flowers grown from scrap metal, fruits shaped like stars, a tiny flute carved from crystal that played itself when held near her lips. Tarek started talking more, not just commands or complaints, but memories. His childhood on a drowned world where cities sank beneath rising tides. The sister he'd lost to a mining accident. The dream he'd abandoned of building a garden dome on a peaceful moon. One evening, as the ship floated above a frozen ocean planet, its surface glittering like shattered glass, Tarek sat cross-legged on the floor of the main cabin, trying to fix a broken comms array with greasy fingers and fading patience. Sparks snapped at his fingertips. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered. "Just work for once." A soft chime echoed behind him. He turned. Both sisters stood there, barefoot, their white hair glowing faintly in the dim light. Without a word, they knelt beside him. Lyra placed one hand on the circuit board. Mira rested hers on the power core. They closed their eyes. A low hum filled the room, gentle at first, then rising in harmony. The damaged wires shimmered, mending themselves like living veins. The cracked screen flickered, then lit up with clear signal. The voice of a distant trader crackled through. "Any vessel in Sector 9, we've got fresh water and news from home." Tarek stared at the working unit, then at them. "You didn't have to do that." They looked at him, unblinking. Then Mira reached out and gently wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek. Her fingers were cool, but the touch sent warmth rushing through him. Lyra leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. A gesture so intimate, so unexpected, that Tarek froze. It wasn't romantic, not in the way he understood. It was deeper, a merging of presence, of spirit. He felt it, their quiet strength, their ancient sorrow, their cautious trust. And in that moment he knew. They weren't just healing machines or protectors. They were healers of the soul. From then on, something shifted. Not suddenly, but like seasons changing. Tarek began setting 3 places at meals, even when one bunk was empty. He spoke to them about the future, not survival but dreams. "Imagine," he said one night, floating in 0G after a minor engine shutdown, a planet with real trees, not grown from sound, not forced into being, but ones that grew slow and wild. Rivers that don't carry poison. Nights where the only sound is wind and crickets. He laughed. "I sound like a child." But the twins didn't laugh. They floated beside him, their green skin catching the starlight, their hair drifting like smoke. And slowly, together, they began to sing. Softly, a melody without words, full of sunlight and open fields. Around them, Tiny specks of dust in the air began to glow, swirling in time with the music. A single green shoot sprouted from a crack in the wall, unfurling a leaf that shimmered like jade. They were imagining it too. As weeks passed, their journey took them deeper into the uncharted rim, far beyond Dominion patrols and corporate colonies. They visited dead worlds, cratered husks where cities lay buried under ash, and left them changed. With song, the Siren awakened dormant seeds trapped in the soil for centuries. Forests rose like ghosts returning home. Rivers, long dry, began to flow again, fed by underground springs stirred to life by harmonic pulses. Animals, strange, shy creatures, emerged from caves, drawn by the sound of growth, of return. People began to follow. Not hunters this time, but refugees, survivors. A family from a scorched moon arrived in a dying shuttle, their children gasping for clean air. Tarek welcomed them aboard. The twins sang over the ship's filters, purifying the atmosphere in minutes. An old scientist from a fallen research outpost, drifting in cryosleep, was found adrift in an escape pod. They revived him, and Mira spent days humming softly by his side until his trembling hands could hold a cup again. Word spread faster now. The ship of song, the garden vessel, the sisters of sound. Pilgrims began to seek them out, not for salvation, but for hope. And Tarek, once a man who avoided connection, found himself leading something he never planned. A caravan of the lost, following a broken ship and two silent women who carried life in their voices. Yet danger still hunted them. The Dominion hadn't forgotten, nor had the Black Spire Syndicate, a ruthless cartel that dealt in rare biotech. Whispers of the Siren's power made them valuable, too valuable to leave free. One night, as the dust mite docked on a floating reef colony built atop a gas giant storms, 3 sleek war drones descended from the clouds. Silent, fast, armed with sonic dampeners, weapons designed to shatter vocal cords, to silence singers forever. Tarek saw them first on radar. "We've got company," he said, gripping the controls. "And they're not here for tea." The twins appeared beside him, calm as ever. But this time Tarek stepped in front of them. "No," he said, "not again. You've done enough. Let me handle this." Lyra placed a hand on his chest. He could feel the vibration beneath her palm. Fear, yes, but also love. Protection. She shook her head. They moved past him. At the airlock, they stood together, facing the approaching drones. The sky raged around them, lightning flashing in purple streaks. The machines hovered, weapons charging. Then, the lead drone fired, a wave of anti-resonance energy designed to paralyze, to destroy. The twins opened their mouths and sang. But this time it wasn't defense. It was transformation. Their voices intertwined, rising not in anger, but in sorrow, for every world silenced, every voice stolen, every life crushed under boots of greed. The sound wave that erupted wasn't destructive. It was reclaiming. It washed over the drones like a tide. Metal softened. Circuits glowed gold. Weapons melted into vines of living alloy, sprouting leaves and tiny flowers. The drones didn't explode. They bloomed. Floating gardens of steel and chlorophyll drifted upward into the storm clouds, spinning gently, singing back in tiny chimes. Tarek watched, breathless. "You didn't kill them," he whispered. "You forgave them." That night, as the colony celebrated with lanterns made of light-refracting jellyfish, Tarek sat on the outer deck with the twins. Below, the gas giant churned, its storms calming under the influence of lingering harmonics. He reached out hesitantly and took both their hands. They didn't pull away. Instead, they leaned into him, one on each side, their heads resting on his shoulders. "I never thought I'd find this," he said, voice thick. "I spent so long running from everything, from pain, from people, from feeling anything. And then I bought 2 slaves out of pity, and ended up with the most extraordinary beings in the galaxy." He chuckled. "If someone told me a year ago that I'd be crying on a floating island in the sky, sandwiched between 2 alien women who grow trees from trash, I'd have called them insane." Mira turned her head and kissed his cheek. Soft, brief, but electric. Lyra squeezed his hand. "You're not just my rescuers," he whispered. "You're my family. Maybe even more." They didn't answer with words, but the ship responded. The walls of the dust mite began to breathe. Panels of metal peeled back like bark, revealing living wood beneath. Vines curled along the ceiling. A small tree sprouted from the center of the deck, its branches stretching toward the skylight, bearing fruit that glowed like captured stars. The air smelled of rain and honey. The ship wasn't just fixed. It was alive. And so were they. Months passed. The caravan grew. Ships joined them. Ramshackle vessels carrying farmers, artists, ex-soldiers seeking peace. Together, they formed a fleet, orbiting a small blue-green planet hidden in a nebulous embrace. A world untouched by war, rich with soil and rivers, silent no longer. The Sirin descended first, walking barefoot across the grass, their hands clasped. They sang for 7 days and 7 nights, and the planet answered. Forests exploded from the earth. Flowers bloomed in fractal patterns. Birds with iridescent wings returned from hiding. A great tree, towering, ancient-looking, though born in hours, rose in the center of a valley, its roots spreading like a heartbeat across the land. This was it. Home. Tarek stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the twins dance in the morning light, their laughter ringing like bells. Children from the fleet ran after them, giggling as flowers sprouted beneath their feet. He smiled, heart fuller than he'd ever believed possible. He wasn't their owner. He wasn't their savior. He was simply Tarek, the man who said yes when no one else would. The one who saw worth in what others called worthless. And in return, he had been given not just love, but purpose. Not just a home, but a world reborn. And as the wind carried the sound of singing across the hills, 2 voices, now joined by hundreds, he knew the story wasn't ending. The morning of the wedding dawned in hues of gold and soft violet, as if the sky itself had dressed for the occasion. The great tree at the heart of the valley, now known to all as the heartroot, spread its canopy wide, its leaves shimmering with dew that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Vines heavy with blossoms formed natural arches around the clearing, and the air hummed gently, alive with the whispers of wind, birdsong, and the distant chime of crystal flowers swaying in the breeze. It was a day unlike any other on this newly awakened world. A day not marked by survival, but by joy. Tarek stood beneath the largest bough of the heartroot, dressed not in fine silks or military regalia, but in simple clothes woven from moon fiber and desert flax, gifts from the people who now called this place home. His boots were scuffed, his hair tousled by the wind, and his hands trembled slightly as he clasped them before him. He wasn't a man of grand speeches or noble blood. He was just Tarek, a mechanic, a wanderer, a man who once thought love was for poets and fools. But today, he would marry not one, but 2 souls who had reshaped his life with silence and song. Lyra and Mira approached together, barefoot, their green skin glowing in the early light, their long white hair braided with living vines and tiny star-shaped blooms that pulsed softly with each step. They wore gowns grown from sound and soil, one deep emerald like forest shadow, the other pale silver like mist over water, woven by the fleet's artisans under the guidance of the Sirin's harmonics. Their eyes, wide and luminous, found his instantly, and though they did not speak, their smiles said everything. They stepped onto the petal-strewn path, arms linked, moving in perfect rhythm, as they had since the beginning. Behind them, children released glowing moths into the air, their wings fluttering like tiny lanterns. The gathered people, humans, aliens, refugees, dreamers, rose quietly, their faces alight with wonder and warmth. An elder from the reef colony, who had come to honor the union, stood beside Tarek and raised a hand. "We are here," she said, her voice carrying across the hush. "Not to witness a joining of convenience, nor of duty, but of love so rare it defies stars and silence. 3 souls who found each other in the dust, who healed a broken ship, a broken world, and most of all, each other." She turned to Tarek. "Do you accept Lyra and Mira, not as property, not as power, but as equals? As partners in life, in peace, in the quiet moments and the storms?" His throat tightened. He looked at them, really looked, and saw not just the women who could sing life from dead earth, but the ones who had held his hand when he wept, who laughed at his terrible jokes, who taught him that kindness was the strongest force in the universe. "I do," he said, voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "With all that I am." She turned to the twins. "Lyra, Mira, do you accept Tarek? Not as master, not as savior, but as your heart, your home, your forever." They didn't hesitate. Together, they reached out, placing one hand on his chest, the other over theirs. Then, in unison, they sang. Not a long melody, not a complex harmony, just 3 pure notes, one low, one high, one in the middle, that wove together like threads of light. It was the Sirin way of saying yes, a vow older than words, older than war. The ground beneath them trembled gently, and from the base of the heartroot, 2 new saplings sprouted, twisting together as they rose, their trunks merging into one, their leaves a blend of green and silver. The crowd exhaled in awe. "You may kiss your brides," the elder smiled. Tarek stepped forward, heart pounding. He kissed Lyra first, softly, reverently, feeling the warmth of her skin and the quiet vibration in her lips, like a song held just beneath the surface. Then he turned to Mira, who smiled before meeting his kiss, sweet and deep, full of laughter and promise. When he pulled back, both sisters leaned into him, one resting her head on his shoulder, the other wrapping her arm through his. He closed his eyes, breathing them in, the scent of rain, of blooming night flowers, of home. From that day on, the valley became known as Sir Tarek, the singing home. The fleet disbanded not from failure, but from success. Ships departed to rebuild elsewhere, carrying seeds, songs, and stories of the planet where music gave life. Some stayed, building homes nestled among the trees, farms fed by harmonic soil, schools where children learned not only science and history, but how to listen, to wind, to water, to each other. Tarek and the twins lived in a cottage woven from living wood at the edge of the meadow, its walls growing thicker with each passing season, its roof open to the stars. They woke together every morning, sharing tea brewed from singing herbs, watching the sun rise over the hills. Sometimes, they worked, Tarek repairing tools or teaching mechanics to eager apprentices, while Lyra and Mira walked the fields, coaxing color into wilting plants, calming frightened animals with lullabies. But more often, they simply were. They danced in the rain. They swam in the crystal river. They sat beneath the heartroot at night, wrapped in blankets, telling stories, Tarek recounting old spacefaring tales, the twins responding in melodies that painted images in the air like living dreams. When grief came, as it sometimes did, in memories of lost worlds and stolen years, they held each other and sang until the weight lifted. Years passed. Their love did not fade. It deepened like roots into stone, like rivers into earth. And though they never bore children in the way of flesh, they became parents in spirit, guiding the young, healing the sick, nurturing the fragile peace they had built. A little girl with moss-green freckles and silver-streaked hair, who arrived orphaned from a war-torn moon, called them Mother Lyra, Mother Mira, and Papa Tarek, and they loved her as their own, teaching her the first notes of the oldest song. No armies came. No hunters dared approach a world guarded by harmony. The Dominion whispered of the garden planet, but none sent ships. Perhaps they feared what they could not control. Or perhaps, somewhere in their cold hearts, they remembered what it meant to be human, to be alive. And so, life unfolded in gentle rhythms. Seasons changed. Trees aged. Stars wheeled overhead. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the valley, Tarek sat on the porch of their home, older now, his hair streaked with gray, his hands worn but strong. Lyra rested against him, her breathing slow and even. Mira sat at the edge of the garden, humming a quiet tune as fireflies pulsed in time with her voice. He looked at them, his wives, his miracle, his forever, and smiled. "They called you worthless," he said softly, so only they could hear. "They said you were free because no one wanted you. But you were never free. You were priceless." Lyra opened her silver eyes and touched his face. Mira turned and sang a single, sweet note, and the whole world seemed to sigh in contentment. In the end, they weren't just survivors. They were love made real, a family born from silence, and a peace that lasted, not because it was enforced, but because it was sung, every day, by 3 hearts that chose each other, again and again, under a sky full of stars.